I'm standing at a place I never expected to reach. Not because something extraordinary happened overnight. Not because life suddenly became easier. Not because I finally found the answer everyone spends years searching for. I'm here because one quiet realization changed everything I believed about myself. And once that realization appeared, there was no returning to the version of me that existed before it. Most people think change begins with motivation. They imagine one powerful speech, one inspiring video, one painful failure, one perfect morning where they wake up feeling like a completely different person. But that's not how transformation begins. Real transformation is almost invisible. It starts in a place no one else can see. A single thought becomes impossible to ignore. A question keeps returning. A feeling refuses to disappear. You continue living your life exactly as before. Yet something underneath has already shifted. You still smile. You still work. You still speak to people. But internally, nothing feels the same. Because awareness has entered the room, and awareness is dangerous. Not because it hurts. Because once you truly see your own patterns, you lose the ability to pretend they aren't there. That's the price of becoming conscious. Before awareness, excuses feel convincing. After awareness, they sound empty. For years, I believed life was happening to me. I blamed circumstances. I blamed timing. I blamed people. I blamed opportunities I never received. I blamed the version of myself I wished I wasn't. It felt reasonable. It even felt true, until one uncomfortable question refused to leave me alone. What if my biggest limitation wasn't outside me? What if it was the person making every decision inside my own mind? That question disturbed me more than any failure ever could. Because if the answer was yes, then waiting for life to change would never be enough. I would have to change the one person experiencing it, myself. That sounds simple when you hear it. It isn't, because changing your life doesn't begin by changing your schedule. It doesn't begin by buying better books. It doesn't begin by downloading another productivity app. It begins by questioning the identity you've protected for years. And identity isn't easy to challenge. Your mind has spent thousands of days convincing you that you already know who you are. I'm lazy. I'm unlucky. I'm always anxious. I'm not disciplined. I'm not talented. I've always been like this. Notice something. Every one of those sentences starts the same way. I am. Those two words carry enormous power because your brain listens. It doesn't argue. It doesn't investigate. It accepts repeated identity statements as instructions. The more often you repeat them, more your behavior begins proving them right. Not because they're true, because your brain prefers consistency over possibility. That's why two people can face the same obstacle and walk away with completely different futures. One says, "This failure proves I'm not good enough." The other says, "This failure shows me what I need to learn." Same event, different identity, different future. The event wasn't deciding their lives. Their interpretation was, and that realization forced me to look inward, not at what I had done, but at the invisible system producing everything I did, because behavior isn't random, habits aren't random, confidence isn't random, fear isn't random. Everything has a source. Every action begins long before anyone sees it. Inside thought, inside belief, inside identity. Imagine a tree. Everyone notices the branches, the leaves, the fruit. No one pays attention to the roots, yet the roots determine everything growing above the surface. Your life works the same way. Success is visible. Failure is visible. Discipline is visible. Procrastination is visible. But the roots, beliefs feeding those outcomes, remain hidden. Most people spend their entire lives trimming branches. Very few ever examine the roots. That's why change feels temporary. Someone starts exercising. For 2 weeks, they stay committed. Then, suddenly, they quit. Not because the workout failed, because the identity underneath never changed. They're still trying to become disciplined while secretly believing they're someone who always gives up. The roots win. Every time. I used to think discipline meant forcing myself. Now I understand something different. Real discipline isn't built through punishment. It's built through alignment. When your identity changes, your behavior follows naturally. You stop forcing consistency. Consistency becomes your normal. That's why some people wake up early without struggle. Some read every day without motivation. Some protect their health without constant temptation. It isn't because they're stronger. It's because their identity stopped arguing with their actions. They no longer negotiate with themselves. And that may be the greatest freedom a person can experience. Not controlling every thought, but no longer fighting yourself every day. I wish someone had told me this years ago. I wasted so much energy trying to fix my actions while completely ignoring the mind creating them. It's like trying to change the reflection in a mirror without changing the person standing in front of it. Impossible. The reflection isn't the problem. The source is. That's when I stopped asking, how do I become successful? And started asking, who would I have to become for success to feel natural? That question changed everything, because it shifted my attention away from achievements, went toward identity. Achievements can disappear. Identity remains. Money comes and goes. Identity stays. Recognition rises and falls. Identity survives. That's why people who build themselves can lose everything and still rebuild, while others lose one opportunity and lose themselves with it. External success without internal transformation is temporary. Internal transformation creates external success again and again. This isn't about becoming someone fake. It's about removing everything that never truly belonged to you. The fear, the borrowed opinions, the labels placed on you by people who barely understood themselves, the stories you accepted before you were old enough to question them. Piece by piece, you begin separating who you are from who you've been told to be. And that process isn't comfortable because every identity fights for survival, even the painful ones, even the limiting ones. Your mind would rather remain familiar than become free. That's why growth feels uncomfortable. You're not just learning new habits. You're leaving behind an old version of yourself that desperately wants to stay alive. It whispers things like, "This won't last. You've tried before. People like you don't change. You'll end up back where you started." Those thoughts sound personal. They're not, they're predictable. Every mind protecting an old identity says the same things. Not because they're true, because uncertainty feels threatening. The unknown has always frightened the human brain. But here's what changed everything for me. I stopped treating those thoughts as facts. I started treating them as evidence that change was actually happening. Resistance isn't proof you're failing. Sometimes it's proof you're moving beyond the version of yourself that's been in control for years. And once I understood that, AB stopped fearing discomfort. I started respecting it, because every meaningful transformation begins exactly where comfort ends. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, one decision, one repeated action, one identity shift at a time. And without realizing it, your entire life begins moving in a direction that once felt impossible. Not because the world changed, because the person experiencing the world finally did. There was something no one warned me about. Changing your life doesn't begin the day your habits change. It begins the day your excuses stop sounding believable to yourself. That's a strange moment to experience. Nothing around you looks different. The same room, the same routine, the same people, the same responsibilities waiting for your attention. From the outside, your life appears untouched. But internally, something has shifted so completely that you can no longer hide behind the stories you've been telling yourself for years. And those stories are powerful, not because they're true, because they're familiar. The human mind will defend a familiar lie more fiercely than an unfamiliar truth. That's why people remain in situations they secretly hate. Jobs they complain about every day. Relationships that slowly drain them. Habits that quietly steal years from their lives. Dreams they abandoned long ago, not because they're incapable of changing, because familiarity creates the illusion of safety. Your brain doesn't naturally pursue the best future. It pursues the most predictable one. That realization forced me to ask another question. If my brain values familiarity more than growth, then who has really been making my decisions all these years? Was it me, or was it a collection of repeated patterns running on autopilot? Think about your average day. How much of it is actually a conscious choice? The route you take, the way you react to criticism, the food you reach for when you're stressed, the words you use to describe yourself, even the thoughts that appear when you wake up. Most of them weren't chosen in that moment. They're rehearsed, repeated, automatic. Your brain loves efficiency. Every repeated behavior becomes easier. Every repeated thought becomes faster. Every repeated emotion becomes more accessible. Eventually, you stop creating your life. You start repeating it. That's why 1 year can quietly become 10. Not because time moves faster, because repetition makes days blend together. You wake up, do what you've always done. Think what you've always thought. Rat-racked the way you've always reacted, then wonder why nothing feels different. The answer isn't hidden. It's uncomfortable. Nothing changes, because the person making today's decisions is still operating with yesterday's identity. You can't expect a different destination while following the same internal map. That's why motivation fades so quickly. Motivation creates temporary action. Inditanity creates permanent direction. For years, I chased motivation. I waited until I felt inspired. I watched videos, read quotes, promised myself that tomorrow would be different. Sometimes it was for a day, maybe a week. Then everything quietly returned to normal. I thought I lacked discipline. The truth was simpler. I kept trying to borrow emotions instead of building systems. Feelings rise and fall. Systems remain. But even systems aren't enough if the identity beneath them never changes. Imagine trying to convince yourself you're healthy while secretly believing you're someone who always quits. Every healthy action feels like acting. Eventually, you return to the role you've practiced the longest. That's why your identity is always stronger than your intentions. Intentions are wishes. Identity feels like truth. And people behave according to what feels true, not according to what sounds inspiring. Once I understood that, AB stopped asking whether I felt motivated. I started asking whether today's actions matched the person I was becoming. Some days the answer was yes. Some days it wasn't. But I stopped judging myself for it because transformation isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by direction. One decision rarely changes a life. Thousands of small decisions, made consistently, always do. The strange thing is that those decisions often look insignificant. Drinking water instead of another sugary drink, reading 10 pages instead of scrolling for 30 minutes, going to bed on time, keeping one promise you made to yourself, standing up after failing instead of creating another excuse. Individually, they seem too small to matter. Collectively, they build an entirely different person. That's how identity changes, not through one dramatic breakthrough. Through repeated evidence, every promise you keep becomes proof. Every difficult decision becomes proof. Every disciplined action becomes proof. Eventually, your brain notices. It begins updating its conclusion. Maybe I'm not someone who always gives up. Maybe I'm becoming someone who finishes. Maybe I'm becoming reliable. Maybe I'm becoming focused. Maybe I've been wrong about myself this entire time. That moment is powerful because confidence isn't created by positive thinking. Confidence is created by accumulated evidence. You trust yourself after watching yourself keep your word, not before. That's why self-respect can't be purchased, it can't be borrowed, it can't be given by another person. It has to be earned through repeated honesty with yourself. And honesty is uncomfortable because it forces you to stop blaming circumstances for choices that belong to you. It's easier to say, I don't have time. Harder to admit, I gave my time to things that don't deserve it. It's easier to say, I can't focus. Harder to admit, I've trained my attention to chase distraction. It's easier to say, I'll start someday. Harder to admit, I've become addicted to postponing my own life. Truth rarely attacks you, it simply removes places to hide. At first, that feels painful. Later, becomes freeing. Because once you stop lying to yourself, you also stop needing to remember the lie. Everything becomes simpler, clearer, more intentional. That's when another realization arrived. Your environment is constantly negotiating with your future. Every object in your room, every notification on your phone, every conversation you repeat, every person influencing your mindset, they are either making your future easier or harder. Nothing is neutral. Your surroundings quietly vote on the person you're becoming. If distraction surrounds you, focus becomes harder. If negativity surrounds you, optimism becomes harder. If comfort surrounds you, growth becomes harder. Willpower can fight your environment only for so long. Eventually, environment usually wins. That's why changing your life often begins with changing what repeatedly enters your mind, the music you consume, the conversations you tolerate, the people whose opinions shape your confidence, the content you watch every day. Your brain is always absorbing something. The only question is whether it's building you or programming you to remain exactly where you are, because that's what repetition does. It programs whether you notice it or not. Every repeated message becomes another brick in the identity you're constructing. And one day, you wake up living inside a personality built from thousands of repeated influences. Some chosen, many never questioned. That realization changed how I protected my attention. Because attention isn't just focus. Attention is life. Whatever consistently receives your attention eventually receives your future. And once your future belongs to something, your identity slowly follows. That's why reclaiming your attention may be the first true act of freedom. not because it solves every problem overnight, but because it allows you to choose who is shaping the person you're becoming. Most people believe freedom means having unlimited choices. I don't think that's true anymore. Real freedom is choosing which thoughts deserve to stay and which ones no longer have permission to define you. Everything changed the day I realized my mind wasn't a place where every thought deserved to live. Some thoughts were inherited, some were borrowed, some were planted by fear. Some were repeated so often that I confused them with reality. But repetition doesn't create truth, it creates familiarity. And familiarity has fooled millions of people into believing they know exactly who they are, when they've never truly questioned the voice introducing itself as me. The day you begin questioning that voice is the day your real life quietly begins. There comes a moment when you realize the hardest battle was never against the world. It was against the version of yourself that kept insisting nothing could be different. Not because that version was evil, not because it wanted you to fail, but because it was built for survival, not transformation. Your mind learned patterns that once protected you. Avoid rejection, avoid uncertainty, avoid failure, avoid discomfort. At some point, those strategies probably helped, but survival strategies have a habit of overstaying their purpose. They become permanent. And what once protected you slowly begins limiting you. The strange part is that limitations rarely announce themselves. They disguise themselves as personality. I've always been shy. I've never been disciplined. I'm just an overthinker. I'm the type of person who loses motivation. Those statements feel harmless, but every time you repeat them, you're signing another agreement with an identity that may no longer belong to you. The brain loves repetition. It hears those words enough times, and eventually it stops questioning them. It simply says, if this is who we are, then this is how we behave. That's why changing your language changes more than your conversations. It changes your internal instructions. Every sentence you speak to yourself becomes part of the architecture of your mind, and architecture determines what can be built. Imagine constructing a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. No matter how beautiful the design is, won't survive. Goals work the same way. People become obsessed with setting bigger goals, more money, better health, a stronger body, a successful career, but goals are built on identity. If the foundation is unstable, achievement eventually collapses. That's why some people achieve everything they once wanted and still feel empty, because they upgraded their circumstances without upgrading the person experiencing them. External success cannot permanently repair internal confusion. It only amplifies it. For a long time, I believed I needed more confidence before taking action. Now I understand something completely different. Action doesn't come after confidence. Confidence comes after action. Every courageous decision leaves evidence. Every difficult conversation survived. Every promise kept. Every obstacle faced instead of avoided. Those moments accumulate quietly, one by one, until your brain has no choice but to update its belief about who you are. That's how confidence is built. Not by waiting until fear disappears, but by proving to yourself that fear no longer gets the final vote. Because fear never truly leaves, it simply loses authority. Most people spend years trying to eliminate fear. I think they're solving the wrong problem. Fear isn't the enemy. Obedience to fear is, you can feel uncertain and still move. You can doubt yourself and still continue. You can be afraid and still become the kind of person your future requires. Courage has never meant the absence of fear. It means refusing to let fear become your identity. That distinction changed everything for me, because once I stopped trying to feel fearless, B finally started becoming stronger. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength appears in ordinary moments, choosing discipline when no one is watching. Keeping your word when breaking it would be easier. Walking away from habits that once controlled you. Remaining patient when immediate pleasure is calling your name. Those moments don't usually receive applause, but they shape your character more than any public achievement ever could. Character is built in private. Reputation is built in public. Most people chase reputation. Very few protect their character. And character is the only thing that remains when circumstances change. Money can disappear. Recognition can disappear. Relationships can change. Opportunities can come and go, but the person you've built within yourself travels with you everywhere. That's why personal growth is never wasted. No lesson disappears. No discipline day becomes meaningless. No honest effort is ever truly lost. Even when results take longer than expected, you're becoming someone capable of carrying those results when they finally arrive. That's another truth people often misunderstand. Life isn't only preparing opportunities, sometimes it's preparing you, because receiving something before you're ready often becomes another way of losing it. Imagine handing enormous responsibility to someone who hasn't developed patience. Imagine giving success to someone who still depends on constant validation. Imagine giving freedom to someone who hasn't learned self-control. The opportunity wouldn't save them. It would expose them. Preparation always comes before permanence. Nature understands this. A tree spends years strengthening its roots before carrying heavy branches. A building receives its foundation before its highest floor. Everything lasting is built slowly. Only humans expect overnight transformation. We've become impatient with a process that has always required time. Yet time isn't the real challenge. Consistency is. Anyone can stay motivated for a day, some can remain motivated for a week, but the people who completely rewrite their lives aren't relying on motivation anymore. They're relying on commitment. Commitment is different. Motivation asks, how do I feel today? Commitment asks, who am I becoming regardless of how I feel? One question changes with emotion, the other changes your future. Eventually, I realized that every meaningful transformation asks for the same sacrifice, not your comfort, not your intelligence, not even your talent. It asks for your old identity because two versions of you cannot occupy the same space forever. At some point, one of them has to leave. The version that avoids responsibility, the version that waits for perfect timing, the version that believes circumstances determine destiny, or the version willing to build a different future one decision at a time. Both cannot survive together. One grows stronger every time you repeat old habits. The other grows stronger every time you honor your future instead of your impulses. Every day is another vote, not for success, for identity. Who are you becoming? What kind of person are your choices creating? Those questions matter more than any temporary result because results eventually reflect identity, always. You don't become successful first and then think differently. You think differently first, and success gradually becomes a consequence. That's why transformation feels invisible for so long. The roots are growing underground. Nothing dramatic appears above the surface. Then one day, people call your progress sudden. They never saw the months of invisible construction beneath it. They only noticed the moment it became impossible to ignore. That's how real change works. Quietly, bossily, without demanding attention. Until one day the person staring back from the mirror feels unfamiliar. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally become someone you were capable of being all along. And perhaps that's the greatest realization of all. Your future has never been waiting for a perfect opportunity. It has been waiting for a different version of you, a version willing to question old beliefs, a version willing to protect its attention, a version willing to keep promises even when no one else would notice, a version willing to choose long-term purpose over short-term comfort. That version isn't hidden somewhere in the future. It begins with the next decision you make, not tomorrow, not next month, not when life becomes easier, now. Because every extraordinary life is ultimately built the same way, one ordinary decision repeated until it becomes identity. And once identity changes, everything else begins to follow.